Dubs hit us up. Strangely, his handle is Dubs Knows Ball. Let's see how well Dubs knows ball. His question: why do we widely accept the Big Ten as the second best conference and comparable to the SEC? The conference has won one playoff game since 2016 and is mediocre outside of Ohio State and Michigan. Even if they are number two, the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is much smaller than the Big Ten and the rest of the field. From New York City. Like I said before, I feel that the connection between myself and you guys is such that I can speak to you like I'm about to have to speak to Dubs. And I'm even going to use a phrase I don't believe in. Not only is the Big Ten the second best conference in America, here comes the dirty phrase, it's not even close. And we're going to take that phrase and put it right back in retirement because 99.9 times out of 100 when someone says it, whatever they're talking about is pretty close. I don't think this is close. Let's just break this down, you and I, for a second. I'm not asking you to wave a Big Ten pom-pom. Not asking you to do that. I am asking you to think logically. Dubs and the rest of you, think logically for just a second. The Big Ten's won one playoff game, he says, since 2016. Accurate. Very selective there, going only back to 2016. It probably has something to do with the fact that Ohio State won the national title the year before, but you know what? I'm not even going to use that as part of my argument. Let's take it as it was presented to us. From 2016 through present day, Dubs says the Big Ten in general is overrated. They are not automatically the number two conference in college football, or even if they are, it's just inches separating them and whoever's behind them, because the Big Ten's only won one playoff game since 2016. And that was Ohio State, by the way, for those keeping track, in 2020. I don't think that's a good argument. You know how I feel about the playoff, but forget about my feelings. Even if that is a good argument, who's done better? Clemson, not the ACC. Clemson is the only program that's done better. Because if you're talking about conferences, you've got, other than the SEC, let me tell you how many playoff wins there have been for other conferences. The ACC is 6-5 in playoff games, and I kid you not, all 6 of them are Clemson. They might as well be Notre Dame. They might as well just be an independent. But the Big 12, they've got one. They've got one win in the playoff era, and that was TCU about 5 minutes ago. The Big 10 in the playoff era has got 3 wins. The Pac-12 has 1, and the SEC's got 16. So yeah, there's a wide gap. If you want to go by this metric, there's a pretty wide gap between the SEC and the Big 10. But let me tell you something. Especially in present day, there is very much a pretty sizable gap between the Big Ten and whomstever number 3 is. I'll put it to you like this, and I'll go back to the question. The question was, why do we just assume that the Big Ten is number 2? Outside of Ohio State and Michigan, he said, it's a mediocre conference. No, it's not. I'd throw Penn State in there. But even if you're right about that, you want to do me a favor? Since we're talking comparatively and not in a vacuum, you want to do me a favor right quick? Anybody can do this. You want to venture across the rest of the country, Pac-12, Big 12, ACC, what have you. Do me a favor. Pick a conference. Remove the 2 best programs in there and tell me what you find. Remove Oklahoma and, well, it should be Texas, but Oklahoma, we're going to remove OU and Texas in a second. So remove like TCU and Kansas State from last year from the Big 12. What you got? Remove Utah and USC last year from the Pac-12. What do you have? You got 2 fairly good programs up there in Oregon and Washington. I would argue you've also got more than 2 good programs in the Big Ten, but where else are we finding it? I don't even think we need to dive into the landfill that has been ACC football outside of Clemson over the past few years. Rooting for you, Florida State. Clench fist, rooting for you. No one's got anything. Here's what you have to do, though. You have to understand the difference, or you have to understand, rather, that there are tiers in this sport. And right now, the phraseology of this question, and you know how rarely I use that word, but the phraseology of this question is perpetuating this kind of narrative that I hear a lot. You're either playoff contender or you're trash. And that's not true. Someone's got to be the 34th best team in the country. Like Minnesota hangs out in that territory. Iowa, most years, would be hanging out in that territory. Wisconsin, in many years hangs out in that territory. Michigan State in most years hangs out in that territory. There is a glob of Big Ten teams that would populate that 30 through 50 range. That is not mediocrity if you consider how the rest of the sport is tiered when you get below the top layer in those conferences. The Big Ten's a very quality conference. And also, since when did we dismiss the top two? Other than Ohio State and Michigan. Yeah, well, it's very convenient that you want to go other than two of the top 4 or 5 programs in college football right now. And Penn State, even the biggest detractor of the Nittany Lions, has to understand program caliber, top 15 easily, I would argue top 10. So that's a really good conference. They're not the SEC, but there's no one else out there like them. And also, this is future forward thinking, but I would encourage you to pay attention to what just happened in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Madison, Wisconsin. And you may think to yourself, who cares? They were terrible last year. In fact, didn't they both fire their coaches? That's the point. It's not that they fired their coaches. It's who they hired. You ever seen Nebraska be that aggressive in hiring a head coach? They went and got Matt Rule. You ever seen Wisconsin be that proactive? They fired Paul Chryst early in the season and went and got Luke Fickell, who was the single hottest commodity on the G5 market. Everyone was convinced, unless Ohio State comes open, he'll probably just hang tight at Cincinnati. They got him at Wisconsin. You know what that's indicative of? It's indicative of a conference that just signed a bazillion-dollar media rights deal and member institutions understanding amongst themselves mediocrity is not good enough. You know, having these coaches that are also ran and these caliber programs that are also ran, it's not good enough anymore. Because I will grant you this, if you've looked at the content calendar that the Big Ten has presented, it is true. If Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State haven't been involved in the game, especially last year, it wasn't must-see TV, and there's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for your Nebraskas and Wisconsins or Iowas not living up to, or Michigan State last year not living up to a higher standard. I think they understand that up there. That is why I think change will eventually come at Iowa. You see, because Kirk Ferentz and the way they do things at Iowa once upon a time was good enough. I think the standard has elevated in the Big Ten because the money has elevated in the Big Ten. And as much as I bemoan a lot of what these new media rights deals have brought with them, one of the beneficiaries may be that overall, your athletic department just feels the need to hold itself to a higher standard to reciprocate the billions of dollars collectively that they are being given from a network, or in this case, networks, and understanding that, hey, man, this era where you're incentivizing your offensive coordinators to score 25 points a game, true story, by the way, not good enough anymore. So not only is the Big Ten the second best conference in college football, I think there is a solid reason to believe they will be strengthening their position, not weakening anytime soon.